Thank you ever so much for coming. It's an absolute pleasure to see you here. My name is Mohammed. I'm the creator and organizer of this event, so to speak. Just one quick thing, as I'm sure you're conscious of. I'm Mohammed, I'm not Charles. Unfortunately, he was taken indisposed very urgently, so he's had to pull out. But not to worry, I'll chair this event. And although I'm not a lawyer, I did study law at Pembroke. So I have a law degree, so there is at least that. Without further ado, I'd just like to say thank you to Wigan for sponsoring some of the costs of this event, and to Pembroke for helping put on this event, particularly to the Master, Sir Ernest Ryder. This is a real opportunity for students such as yourself to hear about the film and TV industry and understand more about what it's like to have a career in this space, and to do so from some real industry leaders. And I think that takes me quite nicely onto some very brief introductions of our fabulous panel. So we'll start off with David Parfitt, who is an astounding producer. David has worked on films like The Father and Shakespeare in Love, for which he won an Oscar, of course. Next, we've got Nikki Van Gelder, who is an absolutely amazing talent agent. She co-founded Conway Van Gelder Grant. It's a talent agent that represents actors and actresses, such as Helena Bonham Carter and Benedict Cumberbatch. I'm sure you guys have heard of them. Next, we've got Chris Orty, who in his own right did some amazing producing work, but for the past 10 or so years has worked a lot in film education, has become a key player in that sphere, and now serves as director of the London Film School. Next, Hossein Amini, a very accomplished screenwriter and director who did Two Faces of January and has written films I'm sure you're conscious of, The Wings of the Dove and the Ryan Gosling cult classic Drive. And then last but not least, we've got Claudia Youssef. She's a commissioning executive for BBC Film and has, in fact, executive produced The Outrun with Saoirse Ronan. She's very talented, very experienced, and I'm really looking forward to having this panel here today to come and discuss their thoughts on the film and TV world. So we'll begin. Thank you so much for coming, guys. I've given a brief snapshot, but I think it'd be good just to hear from you guys what your career in this sort of place in the industry is and how it means to you as a producer, film education. How would you describe the content of your career? David,
going in order.
We can go in order for this one, but feel free to chime in.
Yeah, the content of my career. I came from a very unusual route, I think, in that certainly not an academic route. I was a child actor from 12, and that was sort of the end of my formal education. Formally left school at 16 with no qualifications, but knew in my teens that I didn't want to be an actor. And so looked for opportunities then through acting to move into production, which really came through Kenneth Branagh, who we were in a play together just after he left drama school, and he was fantastically energetic and ambitious and wanted to start his own company, and so we got together at that point in the early 80s to start a theatre company. So my route into film was through theatre, so I produced most of Ken's early films, and now we all have separate companies now, in a good way. Is that sort of what you wanted?
Wonderful. Yep. Yeah. I will just get a little snapshot of everyone before we dive into the real meat of the conversation. I think that's very helpful.
So I also didn't come from an academic route. I left school at, 17, I think, and was fortunate enough, wasn't sure what I was going to do, and got a job in my local theatre, which I loved. At that time, people did repertory theatre, so you had a different play every 3 weeks. So I got to learn a huge amount about the theatre, which I loved and still love. And from there, went to work at another theatre, and then went to work with an incredible agent called Jeremy Conway, he's retired. He had a wonderful client list, some of whom I inherited, and yes, and here I am, still doing it. That's it, really.
I've sort of been a jack of all trades. I started as a critic. I ran the Time Out film department just after graduating, and I realised I'd made a terrible mistake when I was 25, and that criticism would take me further and further away from ever making a film. and I had to jack it in and start all over again, which was really tough. But luckily I had a slightly entrepreneurial attitude. So I ended up starting a small distribution company, and then I bought some cinemas, and on the back of that I financed a film which turned out to be quite successful. And on the back of that I ended up building a business, and eventually in my 30s I got to produce. And then I became a trainee, really, under a mentor who's probably the greatest living art house producer that Britain has produced, a guy called Jeremy Thomas, who's still very much alive. And I ran his business, and we built that together. And I learned most of what I know from working with him and Bertolucci and David Cronenberg and people like that. So that really was my producing career. And I was really halfway through that, I realized I would never be a great producer. But I started teaching occasional seminars at the National Film School, actually, and realized I really loved young people. I mean, I've got lots of kids, and I also generically love engaging with young people. And that became really interesting to me. And then I ended up running 4 departments there, and now I run the London Film School, which is the oldest film school in Britain, and the second oldest in Europe, in fact.
I actually went to university here, and and I started off directing some plays and stuff, but then sort of going around getting money to do short films. So I ended up with 2 short films coming out of university, and then was unemployed for about 4 years. And it's pretty much the nature of my side, I guess, of the industry, is when you're writing or directing, it's completely freelance. So it's a real combination of, I guess, dedication, just being really durable, because you take so many knocks, and luck, really. So it's a bit, I love doing it, and I've been doing it for 30 years and haven't regretted it once, but it's probably, out of everyone here, probably the one where your career is most up and down.
So I started out in live events and television, so like filming Glastonbury Festival, because I thought that was the closest I could get to the film industry. And after a couple of years of doing that, I then went to film school in order to find my way into the industry. And coming back to London after that, I started working in development, so both within independent production companies and within institutions like the BFI and BBC, and that's how I ended up in the job I'm in.
Wonderful, guys. So we've discussed how you guys found the entry point. A lot of these students would be coming into their careers at a slightly different time in a slightly different environment. Could you touch on how you feel like your career or other careers you're familiar with have changed nowadays? What might be similar or what might be different for individuals coming into the industry at this time?
The industry is a lot bigger. It's worth noting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's tough, but it's like 5 times as big as it was 20 years ago, in economic volume terms.
Do you think that
It's also
nowadays-
more industrial, I would say, and less artisanal than it used to be.
and nowadays when
Well, TV's become so huge as well, and the thing is, there's with writers' rooms. So it used to be, when I started, it was you'd write a screenplay on your own, and with TV series, most people would write all the episodes themselves. Whereas I think, and it was something we've sort of inherited from America, now you tend to have big rooms and 8, 9, 10 writers all sitting together, and then they're all sent off to write episodes, which in some ways is great, because it means if you're starting out, there are more opportunities to get stuff made, which is where you learn the most. So that I think is a really positive change.
There's definitely less. I mean, the time span that I've worked in development, in particular, I feel like that shifted quite significantly because of that. That changed. I mean, I don't think anyone would work solely in independent film in development and make a living these days. I think you know, most producers and production companies do have a foot in something else, whether it's TV or sort of being talent adjacent or having some relationship with distribution. It feels like sort of your career feels quite incredible for people to aspire to, I think, in in this day and age.
Yes, I mean, I suppose following from that, it's certainly, from my point of view, less of a business than it ever was in the sort of smaller. But theatre has been our saviour, actually, weirdly. And going back to that, probably just 7 or 8 years ago, when it felt to us that the independent film world was drifting away from us, and that actually re-energised the company by going back to theatre. And now, I mean, obviously I'm that bit older, and so I'm only going to do stuff that is fun. That's the other big change. Not working for the sake of it.
I think also as an agent, it's, you know, you might think that because there's so much more work with the streamers and there's huge amount, it's quite overwhelming actually in terms of trying to keep up with everything, reading everything. Everything is, I think, much more star-led now, including the theatre. Clients who absolutely want to do theatre are in the theatre. A lot of them can't afford it because mostly, unless you're a big star in the West End, you really, you know, the brilliant places, the Almeida, the Donmar, etc., they pay really very little. It's barely a living wage, to be honest. And but mostly when actors come out of drama school, not everyone goes to drama school, not everyone has to go to drama school, but it'd be great to think that everyone would want a career in all the medias. But yeah, I think as an agent, just the sheer volume of what is coming through to us is quite hard to manage now.
I mean, the only thing I would say is that I think people sometimes have unrealistic expectation too. I mean, in the sense that if you said to a very young painter, what do you expect to get out of this economically? The answer might be nothing for a very long time, if at all. And I think that's sort of true across the arts. But somehow, because the machinery of film and television is so big, that from the outside, people may have a different expectation of what is possible. And the answer is, in craft terms, I think as a working editor, as a working VFX person, as a production accountant, you know, at all those levels in the production machine, it's possible to earn a very healthy living. But that's the question of choice. Is that what you want to do with your life, or do you want to be an artist? And what's the balance in your mind between your instincts towards art and your instincts towards craft and sometimes, in some cases, in my case, say business. So it's a really interesting thing about which one needs to reflect, actually. And I think it's something that most people in the industry talk about. You know, oh, so-and-so's made this choice or that choice. Very often that's the dial they're turning.
So do you think, of course, most of these students would be starting out in their career, and as you touched upon, it's not necessarily the most lucrative space, at least to begin with. Do you think there's certain trends, certain ways that you've noticed people have been able to support themselves and sort of balance the making a living and supporting themselves with the creativity and the art that they want to make?
At the beginning?
At the beginning. And the answer might be no. The answer might be, you know, it is tough. But
I think people have other jobs. They work in a restaurant or a pub or something.
Yeah.
And a lot of actors now are trying to develop things because everyone is looking for material. So a lot of actors are now, you know, maybe finding a book that they might be interested in that could be produced, or you sort of need other skills to fall back on, particularly when you're first starting. And also you may do a television that earns you some good money and then you may not work for 6 months, is true.
I would say also writing, if any of you want to be writers or directors, which is the bit I know about, I mean, it's a good time to start now. I mean, that's what I was doing when I was here. And it took, I mean, it takes about, I'd say, writing 8, 9, 10 scripts before you really get any good at it. I think there's, some of it's luck, but some of it's also process. And I think the more you do and the more you practice that craft and that skill, it's just to go. So when you go out into that world, I just think you need a lot of. You could have had a head start by doing that, and I do think you can make good money. It's also, but you're right, Chris. It's a choice because if you want to be artists, it's a tricky industry because it is really an industry, and films are very expensive to make, so and TV is too. So in a way, you can't ever really argue that, oh, this is my vision and I won't change it because you'll be fired, and it's happened to me before. And it's really that's because it's not like being a novelist or a painter or anything like that. You know, there are a lot of people who are dependent on your film and how it does. And so it's much more collaborative than certainly I thought when I got into the industry, thinking, oh, I can make my favourite films and they come straight out of my head, and that's exactly what's going on. There's a lot of compromise involved.
So to go a bit more abstract for a moment, if you'll allow me, in terms of the skills or the sort of the personalities that you see coming up through the ranks in the younger generations, are there any certain traits, any certain characteristics that you see really help someone when they are pushing for something to be made or pushing for a certain career path to be successful?
I come from the other end and say...
Or to the other side, yeah,
well,
absolutely. What doesn't work?
The other week, I met up with David Putnam, who's obviously a huge producer and amazing man, and he said he'd been talking to a group of students about careers in the film industry. And when they opened up the floor at the end, the first question he had was, how can a career in film work with my work-life balance? That was the first question that came from the group. And he said, you're just in the wrong place. And I think that's something that I see.
It becomes your life.
It is absolutely
everything. It is all consuming.
You just don't do anything else. Even when you're not officially working, you're not doing anything else. And I think to your point, Hoss, that reading loads, watching everything, being absolutely aware of the industry before you try and get into it is something. I think just walking in and going, oh, this might be nice.
Yeah.
It's also very hard, I think, to stand back from the habit of being a consumer, but quite essential. I mean, we all have our personal affections and things we like. Oh, I like that, I don't like that. That was fun, this wasn't fun for me. But that's not very interesting, actually. What's interesting is method, technique, a grasp of method and technique and how you make things work. And I think that's sort of quite difficult if you've started life as a keen consumer. And I had this problem when I was starting out, if I'm honest. I went from being a very keen undergraduate at Cambridge who ran a film society and started a magazine to being a young critic who was very confident in their own opinions. And then I had to kind of completely, like Hoss, I had to completely turn my head around and understand that I had to engage with people who were looking for what value I was providing, what would work, on what terms, at what scale, for what cost. And that you'd see that at one level by standing at the back of the Gate Cinema at night watching the film with the audience, which I used to do most nights. It was our cinema. Or you'd see it when you did the rounds with the script and realized you were never going to be able to get anyone to put up any money. It's that kind of changing of gear that's quite important.
And Claudia, in your capacity as a commissioning executive, sort of following on from that, do you notice that certain, going away from just the abstract, but even also content, something I'm quite interested in discussing is whether the appetite for what they watch has changed. And do you think people are coming at it from a certain lens when, from say, just as a consumer? Or are people bringing fresh ideas? Is that what's exciting? Or
do you mean are people coming to us with preconceived ideas of what they want to make because of what they've watched?
Do you think what they bring reflects merely what they watch and merely what's trendy at the moment? Or do you see a lot of innovation coming through? And to be blunt, is there one that you prefer?
No, I think the best filmmakers and screenwriters are coming to us with very original work, and there's quite a lot of... I mean, I think it's an amazing time at the moment for new filmmakers in the UK. There's a real boom. There's been a lot of support for a new generation of filmmakers to come through, and with that I've seen a lot of experimentation and a lot of novelty and a lot of uniqueness. Where that meets audience is the challenge, I think. Where that finds distribution and where you know, the most innovative work is actually finding its audience. I think it's more challenging than ever.
Right.
But the work itself is out there, and I, you know, people continue to, you know, even young people continue to want to make films, which is very exciting to me, and have something new to say and have something reinventive to say. But there is a challenge at the moment in the industry as to how that gets distributed and seen.
This might be a bit of a open-ended question, but any thoughts as to how one could overcome that challenge?
I think you're right about the drift back towards film as well. That I don't know, I think we're seeing more and more content from, especially the streamers, that is stretched beyond measure. And I often sit and start watching a series and think, God, I wish this was 2 hours or 90 minutes. And I think that's helping us, actually. Because I think over the next few years, I think people will focus back on single drama, as it were. It's not answering your question
No,
at all.
please,
It's
no,
a follow-on
whatever.
from that, but
No,
sorry.
that is interesting.
But I think also, you know, it's always been the case that there have been lots of brilliant pieces of work that fail economically, but are brilliantly wonderful artistically. I mean, that's the fact of the life you're about to engage in. That's what you have to live with every day, and that's what we live with professionally, right? I mean, if you expected every film that you had passing through your hands, Claudia, to succeed,
On those terms.
it wouldn't, on those economic terms, it would be a disaster.
But I have to say, from my point, if you're, I mean, with a writer, it's okay, but if you're a director and your film doesn't make money, you're in a lot of trouble. And I think I've seen so many friends who've, and I remember when I directed, I was in my head, I was going, I'd rather have good reviews than good box office. Because that's sort of, in Europe, that's sort of how we're brought up. It's about, but in America, it's very much, it's a business, it's an industry. So if your film doesn't make money, you won't get a chance to do another one. So I do think it's quite important to put some of the artistic stuff aside before you go in and go, well, I mean, I'll give you an example. I did a series about The Bounty, which never got made. It had Ang Lee attached as a director, $25 million an episode, which no one was going to do. And that was my fault for not thinking in advance, it's going to be expensive. Right now, it's not what people want. But I love the story, therefore I'm going to write it. And that was a big mistake. And I think you have to be quite pragmatic about choices when you're about to write something. And you're going to spend a lot of a year plus whatever doing it. So I would say an awareness of where the industry is and what the industry is generally looking for, combined with an originality in the execution, maybe. But I think you do need to be on top of where the industry is.
I think that also applies for actors in the same way, by the way, is that you'd be sent many scripts every week for people to see if they might attach themselves to it. And actually, a lot of them aren't quite good enough. And for that actor, then maybe you would feel, well, not only they've got to love the part, it's all about the writing for actors, whether they want to do something or not, unless it's a purely financial decision, which is fine too. If you want to go and be in EastEnders for a year because you need that money, that's totally acceptable. But often, yeah, people will do a film, and as you say, if it's successful, your career's probably made. And if it's not, you might well be forgotten for a bit.
I mean, I think it's worth emphasising the fact that it's an industry full of, I mean, I've met a lot of very, very, very bright people in my decades in the industry, and it's really intellectually fascinating. I mean, it's an exciting place to work. It may be difficult, but it's always, never less than intellectually stimulating. And I think the other thing is that it's an industry where the cigar smoking, all that nonsense is nonsense. That is nonsense. That is really nonsense. You meet some extraordinary people, some of whom are not creative at all. They're on the other side of the desk, on the business side of the desk. Some of whom are wonderful creators. But the appetite for finding unique voices hasn't gone away. I mean, we're all looking for that thing, that unique tone that you go, God, I've not heard that before. That's a remarkable, you know. And I still have the experience of going to see a film and then going back to see it a second time the following day, because I'm just so taken. I can't kind of get over the fact that this film has shaken me, and I have to go back and look at it again, in a cinema, on my own perhaps, to watch it and think, how did that work? How did that do that to me? And I think you will find most people in the industry think a bit like that. So it's not an unpleasant life, it's just a tough life.
Unpredictable.
And very unpredictable.
And more productions seem to be coming. And in fact, just for context, Charles Moore, who I'm standing in for today as chair, he was a leading figure lobbying the UK government for the high-end TV tax credit. So that helped a lot of productions come in. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how that presents opportunities, not just the high-end TV tax credit, but the wider sort of influx in general, how that benefits young filmmakers, if it does at all.
Well, there's also the new independent film tax credit,
Yes, as very
which
recently.
we would hope would make a big difference to those mid-range films which we've been struggling to make in this country for the past.
And mid-range is quite wide. It means anything up to basically 15 million. It's quite a generous definition of the range too.
I
So
think it's
that
pretty
puts
well
it-
targeted, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it should benefit us. I don't want to sound too bleak, but I still think that British independent film is in trouble.
Yeah.
Because partly I think our audiences haven't returned to cinemas in quite the way. I mean, for blockbusters, absolutely. But for smaller films, you know, I've sat in my local cinema the opening weekend of a small British film with 5 other people. And it's, you know, that's why Picture House are in trouble and others. But it's the right move. And I think maybe it's going to take us a couple more years and it will come back.
But I agree with you. I agree with Corey that there are some brilliant films over the last 5-6 years. I mean, it's something I think if you look back, you know, when film historians look back, there'll be like a little British new wave in the way that we've been talking about other countries and stuff. And there is some, I think because of a lot of the money that's come into it, there are some fantastic filmmakers. So I do think it's really exciting. And yeah, the other, I totally agree that the cinemas aren't doing well a bit. But I think I feel quite optimistic just because of the amount of talent I've seen coming through, really young filmmakers. And I think before we came from quite a theatre, I think somehow as a country, Britain's become much more film literate. And a lot of people of your generation have grown up on films and TV as opposed to theatre, which is certainly when I was coming through, which sort of made film a bit more stilted. And I think now some of these filmmakers are just, you know...
And it's true, isn't it, that realism had a stranglehold on
Yeah.
British cinema for so long. And I feel that has loosened enormously. And I think a lot of the new work is wonderfully not obsessed with...
And not linear.
and not linear. So it's got that sense of freedom of expression
Yeah.
and exploration. And, you know, I mean, After Sun was that's one of the films I went to see twice in 2 days.
Yeah, same. That's what I was thinking. I was just...
You know, that's one of yours, right?
It's quite a puzzle, isn't it, to work
It's
out
an
how it does
amazing
it.
puzzle and refreshingly kind of odd film.
But all those films like Rye Lane and Scrapper and things
Yeah.
have done brilliantly, and those directors are just, they're off making
Also,
films
they're
now,
not
and I don't know
dialogue-led.
how well they did. I wouldn't know. Probably not brilliantly financially, but they were
Okay.
recognised.
It's also worth saying, I mean, I think, you know, if you step into the English language filmmaking universe, you're stepping into the biggest amphitheatral, gladiatorial combat that there is, because there's no language barrier across the English-speaking world. Clearly, if you're a Latvian, you're stepping into a world which makes about 10 films a year. So that's the other thing, is thinking about your own culture in those terms. The span in English-speaking output is so huge, by size, by volume, by all of those things. And, you know, the UK is the second biggest production centre in the world now, you know, by a long, long way. It's like the biggest after California, economically. So you are stepping into a bear pit that's full of, you know, got some very, very large gladiators in it at the top end. And then sort of lots of the smaller creatures racing around trying to make sure that they can find some blood to lick up.
So,
But I suppose one thing just to say is that rather than talking about the quality, which I'm not talking about at all. Absolutely, there have been brilliant films coming out over these years, but the model has changed somewhat, because if the cinemas aren't going to be, if in effect UK distribution are not going to be putting a lot of money in, it's really hard to fund British films for British audiences.
If,
With
if
the
I-
exception of BBC Film and
No, but-
Film 4, it's really,
Yeah.
to put those together now when the audience has not come back, I think it's hard.
And
And it means low budget, great, I don't know what Scrapper was, it was a fantastic film.
Yeah, it made money on its own
Yeah,
terms.
'cause
but
it was-
Yeah, exactly.
But if you're trying in that market, even with the tax credit, when you get into, maybe 5 or 6 million up for a British film, that's really hard.
Yeah.
But of the 10, out of 10 years, 12 years of teaching, 10 at the National Film School, and I'm on my just started my second year at LFS, and I've looked back at the alumni at both places, every single alumnus is working.
That's great.
So now those are dedicated, standalone, craft-specific film schools. They're not university departments with a small film unit bolted on. But it's worth thinking that if you're a working cinematographer or sound person, that's a bit like going up to Ford Dagenham and saying, well, which bit of the factory do you want to be part of? You can be in the paint shop, or you can be in gearbox assembly, and then if you're a specialist, there's always work. But I think a lot of people want one of the only two jobs that's general. And the only two jobs that are generalist jobs in filmmaking process are the director's job to some degree and the producer's job to some degree.
just sort of following on from that point, almost everyone here will be doing what I presume to be a fairly academic degree. I've got a friend doing a PhD in maths in the audience, for example. And do you think that individuals here, do you think film school, after something like this is worth a shot, or acting school, for those who want to get into acting? Or do you like to see people just jumping into the deep end and exploring the world as they find it?
I wish I'd gone to film school. I mean, I definitely, there are a lot of benefits from being here. And when I directed, with actors, I felt very comfortable. It's quite easy. It's basic psychology. But I did wish that I knew more about how cameras worked and just the craft. And I think that's what film school does allow you to do, is pick up a camera. And actually, all my favorite directors can actually pick up a camera and operate, which I can't. And editing as well, and all those different skills and stuff. Is filmmaking it's a combination of all those elements, and I think film school does allow you to sort of learn a little bit of everything, and then whatever you choose to do, at least you have that, And I certainly, if you want to get into, I think writing, I'm not sure, I'm not convinced by, I'll get into trouble with Chris, but I'm not sure about, writing at film schools, because it's something I think you can do, practice on your, that feels, watching lots of films, I think, is frankly the best training for being a
I'd
screenwriter.
agree with that.
But for the technical stuff, I think film schools are great.
Maybe it's good to have that community around you.
Yeah,
as a
exactly.
writer,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
meet all those
Yeah.
peers
Yeah.
and to spend that time
That's very true.
polishing.
But the thing I'd say
Yeah.
to all of you, I'm now in my late 60s, but what I'd say to you is when I look at you all, I'm sure you're all incredibly hardworking. I mean, when I was an undergraduate at King's, Cambridge, I worked so hard, and my work ethic was honed actually in those years. And my ability to work incredibly hard analytically and then go and project a film and then take the Kansas film back to the Porter's Lodge and then book the next shows and, and just do that relentlessly all the way through term. That was incredibly good training for the film industry. Because, in a way, you have to have that, right? All the time. You're on all the time. There's no off button.
Nikki, do you see that as
I
the
think
case
that,
for acting school?
I think the training, again, I think the community really important if you're going to go, I mean, not that you will be, but for a lot of young people might want to go straight from school to drama school. It's quite young to go to drama school, I think. Maybe good to have a gap year, but the idea that you study voice and movement and you do plays for 3 years is invaluable. And still, America looks to Britain for great actors because they think they're all classically trained. And I also have actors who have learned just by exactly as you're saying, by watching huge amount of films and particularly theatres and being familiar with directors and indeed learning from other actors. But I think the training is still valuable. Sometimes it feels long if you've been to university for 3 years and you've got another 3 years. There are quite a lot of courses now that are just a year or maybe 2, and it could be, I mean, great to practice, I don't know, it is dancing or sword fighting, which might come in useful occasionally. I mean, and learning from, experts in their field.
And-
Just voice.
Sorry.
Yeah.
To touch on what we've, film school, to touch on that discussion, something that I noticed come up was this idea of relationships community. Now, in your respective roles, do you feel like there are certain relationships that are quite important? I mean, for instance, for context, I went to a talk Claudia gave a while back, and I mean, not to put you on the spot, you mentioned that when the director came to you, you like to see them attached with the producer. You like to have that relationship, and I'd be curious to hear from you whether there are certain relationships that you really like to see from young filmmakers.
I mean, I think producers, I'm not just saying this stuck up to you two, Chris, and I think producers are, hugely important to young filmmakers. They're the person who's actually going to get your film made. We get filmmakers coming to us and asking us to support them directly, without producers, and it doesn't make sense. We're not going to be on the ground driving it forward. We will support it, we will help develop it, but we're not that relationship, we're not that on the ground person. So that's really important for us, for directors to find that person. It may not always be their person forever, it doesn't always work out, but there's so many people on a film set as well that the less like variation, if something works, I feel like you should stick with it, right? Like and that's the same for us in our relationships with producers and directors. Once you've gone through that process with someone, gone through that process with a writer, you know a bit more about that person and the way they work. Everyone is different, and that's one of the challenging things about the business. From my side, is everyone works in a very different way, and everyone's quite personally invested. It's not like working with machines or much more corporate people. There's sensitivities that you have to be alive to all the time. And once you've learned that about someone, it's like it's a piece of knowledge that it's useful to carry through to the next time you work with them. Yes. So I think those kind of relationships enduring feel quite valuable to me.
Mm-hmm. I mean, some fundamental capacity for curiosity seems absolutely fundamental. The curiosity about the other person and how they work and what they think and what they're doing, and then ingesting that and then doing it again is fundamental to the process. I mean, for a producer, I think without it you can't survive, because you can't possibly know how everything works. So you have to be sufficiently ego-free to go, how does that work? How does that work? That's kind of how you train in leadership in a strange way, by being open to being curious. But I think on the artistic side, I think it's really incredible. I remember the lesson I learned from Bertolucci was playing with the actors. He all he did was he was like really playing with the actors all the time, and that sense of how many ways are there of doing this that will be fun, and that's why they loved him. And then you end up with fantastic performances.
And Hussein, not to put you on the spot, but I'd be curious to hear from a writer's perspective, because a lot of people can say that can be quite an individualistic profession. And of course, with the directing, there's collaboration. But as a writer, did you feel like there were certain relationships that came through?
No, it's funny because as a writer, I actually really like working with different people, because I think you're learning, different directors are pushing you in different ways, and you're, so I don't think I've ever really worked with the same director more, but I can see as a director with a producer, like the TV show that there's a fantastic producer, Robin Slovo, who I've worked with on stuff where I've been either the showrunner or directing. And that, for me, is an invaluable relationship. But as a writer, I sort of feel I sort of want to be led a bit and pushed a bit, I guess like actors do. So it's sort of, to be able to choose, the directors you work with, I think, is it's sort of, it's a very important relationship as well, because I think a director can either make you look great as a writer or terrible. So,
And before we get on to questions, a bit more of a general audience questions. Before we get on to that part, and please be as honest as you want, putting passion aside, is a career in the film and TV a good career?
I've gone horribly wrong at various points, but I've never seen it as a business. It is about creativity, art, if you like, and I think there are parts of it that are very much a business, but from my point of view, not. And I would highly recommend it. It's been great fun.
I also highly recommend being an agent. I love it, and I've got long-standing relationships with people, and in a way, unlike everyone else, or not you maybe, but it's a very secure job, unless all my clients suddenly left. They haven't yet.
And the
but
client
I mean,
list keeps growing.
yeah, it does. But yeah, it's a wonderful job. I get to go and see plays, whether my clients are in or not, but mostly because my clients are in it. I get to see brilliant films. I go on trips. I have relationships with my clients and indeed with people within the industry. And yeah, and it has provided security. So yes, definitely, from my point of view.
I can't imagine having had a different life. I mean, I'm so passionate about it. I go in now with young filmmaking. I supervised Rose Glasses as a student. She did Love Lies Bleeding, and she's an incredible person. You meet that person in the room over the development table when she's doing her graduation film. You know that you're going to have the most interesting conversation you'll have that week. So that is an incredible experience. It's not given to most people. You know, if you're in banking or science or something, you know, you're not having that. So if you like that, that is an unbelievable thing to have as your daily work. I mean,
We
I can't.
might have a very interesting conversation about science.
Well, no. I'm not saying it wouldn't be an interesting conversation about the science, but the variety of humanity that you're exposed to, and the kind of weird eccentricities of human life that you come across are just so multifarious. It's infinitely engaging. It's like the ultimate sort of puzzle. It's wonderful.
And does that align with you guys?
well, yeah, I definitely feel that there's a compromise thing. It's like, if I'm really honest, that the living I've made has been really out of America, not out of the UK. And it's, you know, and there are tough times. It's like I did a rewrite on Snow White and the Huntsman, and to wake up every day and write Snow White gets up and she grabs us. You know, it's sort of, you go, oh, what am I really, is this what I really want to be doing? But then it pays me more per week than spending 3 years on a movie that I wrote and directed. So those choices, and I think that's specifically for writers, I'd say more than anything else, is you sort of have a choice between kind of being happier here and less well paid, because people are kinder, I'd say, in the industry here, but you can make really good money in the States. So it sort of becomes a sort of, you know, I kind of go 1 for me, 1 for them, and I end up doing 1 for me and 10 for them. Sort of, so yeah, you can make a good living there.
And the friendships that come through the engagement with
The
these
friendships
people
are
can be
fantastic. Quite
unbelievable.
often, even the films that haven't been disasters are sometimes the best friendships I've had, because you share these horror stories you've been through. And time kind of heals.
Claudia, do you want to touch on that as well?
Yeah, I think that thing of choices, I mean, you just have to make a choice as to what you want if you want a career in the film and TV industry. My job is secure. You know, there is security to be found, relatively. I mean, touch wood, who knows? There is security to be found in the industry, in places, but, you know, you are making a different choice to being an independent producer, you know, working in an institution, and but you still have a relationship to creativity that I personally find fulfilling, which is why I like to come on these panels and talk about these. I didn't know that development as a job existed before I entered the industry, and that, you know, it's turned out to be the thing that has sustained me. and the thing that I think plays to my skill sets and I enjoy the most. But you don't know, people don't know about these jobs until they find
But I would say it's not I mean, what's an interesting thing to me is if you're curious and polite, it's amazing how many people will talk to you about what they do. If you ask nicely, they will. This is not an industry full of ogres. I mean, David and I have known each other for how long? And how many young people have we seen come and visit us and talk to us and go away? And then, 10 years later, you run into them. It's true, isn't it? That it's not some horrible monolith. It looks like it, I think. I used to be very frightened of the industry when I was starting out. And it looks monolithic and odd. But you've got a huge advantage. When I was starting out, finding out who was really difficult. Now all you have to do is have a subscription to IMDb Pro and spend some time, and you can do it. And you look at, the most simple things. What films do you like? Look at the work. Look at the people who made that work. Find out where they work. Write to those people. And if you write nicely and you think about why you're interested in that work, they will often respond. Yeah. So in that sense, it's not horrible.
And on that note, did anyone have questions for these really polite and lovely people?
So far.
Don't ask the wrong question. Bloke at the back, if that's it.
I'm loud enough, maybe.
Can you
hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I missed some of it, so maybe you kind of answered this question before, because I couldn't hear everything. But so with my friends at Balliol College, we wrote a script together. It's real long, and we're quite excited about it. But we don't really know what should the next step be. None of us have any connections in business. Shall we just cold email producers in London?
What are the producers? What does he think about that?
Well, as someone who is running a company with no staff and no office, no, do not send it to me. It's really hard because, if you, as a very small company, open yourself up to that, you'd never do anything else. So I realise that's probably not the answer that you want, but it is the truth. So you have to find those routes in, like...
BBC
I'd say
Writers'
an
Room?
agent
exactly.
as well.
I believe the BBC will read...
BBC Writers' Room
Yeah,
is the open access portal for writers.
And I think
It's great.
agents are the gatekeepers, really.
Yeah.
It's really, if you could, and it's hard enough to get an agent as well. It's almost harder to get an agent than...
There's also lots of competitions. There's lots of competitions for new screenplays, like BAFTA Rockcliffe, new writers.
which is great.
And if you Google, you'll find lots of other kind of screenwriting competitions, and they're not all worth it, but some of the more higher profile ones, agents do pay attention to, people do go to those showcases, it's not a bad way to...
So once you've written one, instead of, you should actually, while you're waiting for someone to get back to you, just write the next one.
Yeah.
It's just keep writing. There's no point stopping, because these things it's a very slow industry.
Some of my clients have written, say, a short film, which is quite a good way. You might even be able to fund it. You probably have lots of people who want to act in it. I found that's quite a good way, entry into. One of my clients, who's actually a successful actor as well, but he wants to direct and write as well, has made his first short film, and the second one was been at the London Film Festival, and he's now beginning to meet producers as a writer as well as an actor. So that's another thought, maybe, to think about writing a short as well.
I mean, if you think that the fundamentals of a film really aren't to do with effects or any of that nonsense, they're to do with the script and the performances, frankly. That is what an audience pays for. That is what engages people. Then the question in an age when it costs nothing to shoot, which is the great blessing on this generation, you don't have to buy celluloid stock, you don't have to put it through a lab. You just have to shoot it and edit it, which is cost-free, apart from your time. The question of what you turn your idea into, and whether you make a scene or a series of scenes out of it with some actor friends, and then you go, does that work? Let's make it better. Let me show that to you. Let me show you 3 minutes of that. Let me send Claudia Youssef 3 minutes of the film, not 100 pages of script. Do you know what I mean? That is in reality how you eventually put the fishing line in the water and pull on it, and eventually the line gets thicker and thicker and it turns into a net. I know it sounds simple, and I know it, and it requires a lot of work, by the way, doing that. But I think that's the truth.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Just at the front. Yes, yeah. I suppose you can just speak at that.
I wanted to ask, slightly deviating, but more about the role. Oh, wow, thank you. More about the role of music, and particularly, well, I'm an aspiring composer, and I just wanted to ask if you had any sort of insight into the differences in approach and industry opportunities between composing for film and composing for television versus composing for live theatre, and if you've got any sort of, if there's any particular differences or insights you have around those two different worlds, how closely do they intersect, I suppose?
I'm not sure about that.
It's very interesting. Yes, I think they do intersect. And if you, again, get IMDb Pro and look at some of the composers and watch their roots, and certainly people like Stephen Warbeck, as an example, absolutely came up through theatre. I think possibly that's a slightly easier route, in that there's a lot more production in a way that needs not like a full score, but need music. And that was his route. And also that's about relationships too, because that's where he met the directors who brought him forward to film. So I think that is a route.
But also, because composing in film is quite a closed shop. There's like the same people are doing a lot, but they sort of have lots of people working for them. So Hans Zimmer, for example, I think had a school of about 6 or 7 composers who were more, but they're all now big composers in their own rights. And it's so I think relationships with the big composers, if you can get a chance to meet them, that's a really good way in.
I suppose that goes back to the relationships point.
Well, I think particularly with music, I'd say more than any other that I'm aware of is that they're quite a small select bunch. So if like you're saying, go to IMDb Pro and write to those people and just get meetings, and you can just assist or sit in or whatever. And I think it's its own little sort of little world within the film world. So I think you need to be quite sort of strategic and specific about how you approach it.
But it is probably true of most bits in the film industry apart from writing. But going and working for a producer, if you want to be a producer.
No, absolutely.
Yes.
It's just there's very few composers. I just think
It's true,
there's
yeah.
such a small little.
But maybe also getting in touch with theatre directors who might, or even the administrators, just, I'm a composer who, so someone you could recommend I work with. I mean, there's plenty of theatres and all the fringe theatres, which are good.
And composing for
Be a
short
good way to
films.
start.
I think the other thing to always remember, whatever you want to do, is that everyone's voice is unique, but to some degree, what do you like? What work have you seen or heard in your case that resonates with you as work that you like, that feels simpatico to you, that is really your taste? And then follow that thread. Don't follow a thread that's generic. Follow the thread of what it is you love. And there you can be a consumer, by the way, because I think you have to start there as a consumer to understand what it is you really love. And sometimes you run across people who sort of mistake what they love for what they want to make, and then, you've got to be clear about that. But I think that would be how I would start. I mean, the way I trained up as a producer was because I found a guy whose work I admired, and I made a point of going to see him. And we turned out to be extremely compatible. And he's probably one of my best friends 40 years later. And I trained under him, and I love him. It's a very close, lifelong relationship.
Thank you. Any other questions? We'll go up to the back.
How do you protect your intellectual property when you have an idea and you're trying to pitch it to people, write in, and I have heard stories of ideas getting stolen, and so how much do you tell them everything? Or do you kind of hold a bit back, and how do you keep your ideas safe?
To be honest, I don't think ideas are stolen, because it's sort of. I actually got sued once by someone who who claimed that I'd stolen their idea, which was like sort of like a one-line something, which I'd never even
Man
seen.
steals jewels.
But it's so much of it is the execution, and you know, a 120-page screenplay can only be yours. So I'm kind of quite cynical about that. I just find that when people say my idea got stolen, that they've sort of spotted some similarity which is fairly tenuous. And so sending stuff out and it getting nicked, because certainly in my experience, and you'd know, I just don't think people do that.
No, we'll get like 4 screenplays about the same thing quite often.
Yeah.
You know, people are often circling around the same material at the same time for some kind of fortuitous reason, and I think that sometimes that can come across as...
I'd say it's a question I get more from students than I've ever had in the industry. It's a worry that I think is specific to young students who think that something is going to be stolen from them. The industrial practice is not about theft.
And I think the other end of that, I think the reason production companies often don't want to take unsolicited scripts is from the other side, which is about being sued. And I've been sued a lot. Because, you know, I mean, actually, only get sued on successful stuff, actually. You know, everybody who'd ever written anything about Shakespeare sued us over Shakespeare in Love. Everyone had thought of that idea. And
Shakespeare, the common theme. Let's sue.
Funny that. No.
Odd.
And
That's what I just said about it.
So there is that, and that's why going through an agent or a lawyer when you submit something means that we probably take it a lot more seriously, because otherwise it could be someone sending a generalised idea, which they can then say, oh, well, you received it, and therefore you've nicked it. It's stuff. And they never win, by the way, when they sue you.
But the simplest thing is, you know, the way of registering your copyright is to simply send it by email to yourself. I mean, I hope you appreciate it. That's all you need to do. Some people register it with, they register it, or a registered mail used to be the other thing. So there's a clear date stamp around the point of origination, and it's quite clear where it came from. And then your rights as an author are enshrined automatically.
But it shouldn't paralyse you from sending it out, is really what I'm saying.
And by the way, they will ask you what the story's about and how it works out and what the ending is like, too.
I mean, I think you should send it without worrying about that, because it'll just get in the way. It's not.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for this amazing panel discussion. My question is more related to the TV industry in general. So I'm interested in pursuing a career in the journalistic side of TV stuff. And I'm just wondering, with social media becoming bigger and bigger, and TikTok and YouTube getting, expanding, do you think the TV industry will eventually die?
Who wants to say that?
Wow.
No, I think it will reinvent itself. You know, I think there's already very clever people thinking about how, the BBC continues to reinvent itself in this day and age. I think some big things need to happen in order to sustain that industry. But the numbers, the work that people are doing to bring people, the challenge has been recently that 18 to 34-year-olds are not engaging with, broadcast television in the same way as they used to, or teenagers more specifically. But that shift has started to slow down over the past few years. I don't know whether it was COVID. I mean, there's lots of people doing lots of work as to what that's about. But I think there's a lot of clever people thinking about it and trying to sustain something which is communal and nationwide, and not just everyone sitting on their phones by themselves. But I don't think YouTube sits totally outside of that. I don't think the people watching YouTube are doing a totally different thing to watching television. I don't know, you probably feel very differently. As a
No, I
writer.
don't. I think it's actually, in some ways, it's quite exciting because it does make you question storytelling and how to tell stories. And I think that's constantly evolving. It's like feeling this thing about with films that cuts, the amount of time between a thing cutting used to be something like 15 seconds. It's down to about 2 or something. And I think everything's evolving the whole time, so you can't sort of ignore what everyone else has eyes on. And it should be, it's like, I feel the same about AI, is it could be a tool. I mean, the optimistic thing is to go, all this stuff could really help us tell stories in a different way, or tell them more efficiently, or have a bigger connection to an audience and how an audience feels. So I think rather than being sort of afraid of it dying, it's like, how do we, like what you were saying, is how do you reinvent yourself or question yourself and actually tell things that are more up to date, I guess.
Thank you. And just to slide in one final thought on my end, not to be a bit cliche, I'm conscious you raised artificial intelligence. And I think at the moment that's probably not necessarily a huge concern, but I'm sure it's on some people's minds whether in 40 years' time, at the rate things are going, whether there's a kind of concern. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on, just to sort of to wrap it up, we don't have to be pessimistic as such, but your thoughts on that, if you guys were willing to offer some.
I sort of agree with Horst that I think it's potentially a great tool, and I'm sure we'll find productive ways of using it. I don't feel it's going to make any of us redundant, particularly. But, I mean, in fact, a writer who shall remain nameless, who I spoke to a few weeks ago, had said, I'm not obviously going to tell anyone, but I did a treatment for a TV series through AI. But he said it was my information that went in, and I edited it coming out.
Yeah.
It saved me 2 weeks. It was great. He said, but I'm not going to confess.
But there are legal problems with that, though.
I know.
Because you are accessing other people's
Exactly. Where was it sampled from?
writing.
Yeah.
So you could end up with plagiarising someone else's work in your treatment
Yeah.
unwittingly. So
Yeah.
And it's worrying for actors, clearly, because
Yeah.
if they're going to be replaced or their voices are going to be used, which is happening already. So that is definitely a concern for actors. I think maybe more. I don't know, probably more. I think. Yeah.
I just went to bizarre, first time I've ever done this, I went to an film educational conference in which is not my kind of thing at all, but it was quite interesting because the specific focus was AI. And when you look at certain workflows in film, particularly in post-production, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on that's fascinating, which feels very, very innovative. And, I didn't know a lot of these tools like Midjourney and Runway and Stable Diffusion. There's all this stuff going on in the tech end of the back end of filmmaking, which looks very interesting in terms of your freedom to play more with possibly too much choice, actually, bizarrely, because I think constraint is always useful in filmmaking. But I don't really think of it as the death of the script or the death of the performer. I think it's in that technical area that it will become quite powerful. In production management, for example, it's unquestionably going to be a useful tool. But that's about industrial process more than it's about artistic creation. So I'm an optimist. I mean, I'm really an optimist on that. I think the biggest thing that's been a problem, if I had to say what's the biggest problem, is the surfeit of choice for consumers in peak streamer land, which we've gone past it, by the way. Objectively, the volume has fallen in the last 2 years. But I mean, I think that intensity of blizzard of consumption has been slightly numbing. And I think it's created a real problem around viewer choice, curation. All of those things have been slightly blizzarded out. And luckily, they're shrinking back a bit, and people are having to make more choices.
And I think it means that people will demand better.
Yeah.
I think we've had a lot of easy-to-consume products, let's say, from the streamers. High quality, beautiful production values, no substance. And I think after a while, people demand better. And that's why I think TV will survive. And cinema.
Thank you. That brings us to the end. Sonis, would you like to say a final note, if you'd like? Just to...
Can
I just say, first of all, a huge thank you. For 4.5 years, when I walked into this place, I saw an extraordinary range of raw talent. There was a young student singing what he had composed himself in the middle of a quadrangle, but there were equally students playing instruments at the highest level, writing at the most extraordinary level, producing and directing and organising. It's taken us 4 and a bit years to get to today. That was Mohammed's idea, and we wanted to make sure we actually did this on a regular basis, because out there, every year, there's talent, and we just need to make sure they're brave enough to do what I didn't do as an amateur actor at 15, walk to Granada Television and say, have you got a job? That's all right, the law's acting and I survived, and who cares? Every now and then somebody should do that, and you have given us a fabulous insight. Thank you to each and every one of you, because we don't often get that opportunity to see the insight into something that we all enjoy every day of the week. It's part and parcel of our lives, and this has been a fantastic evening to listen to each of you. Mohammed, thank you, and thank you to the
Thank you.
Yeah,
Mohammed.
thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. Should we give one round of applause? Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.